In the early 90s, a whole bunch of video game developers were trying to copy Sonic the Hedgehog's whole animal with attitude, and there were a bunch of characters that really lived off of that whole stealing of Sonic's aesthetic. But there's one character that came out that really didn't have attitude, he was just a freaking idiot. In 1993, we got Bubsy Claws Encounters of the Third Kind. This isn't a very bad game, but it's not notable in any respect. It's just a throwaway title. So throwaway, in fact, that for some reason we got a sequel called Bubsy 2 in 1994, followed by another game that came out for the Atari Jaguar, and I can't even remember the title of that game, because that doesn't matter. What does matter is that in 1996, we got the last game in the Bubsy franchise, the one that killed the franchise dead and prevented another Bubsy game from ever being released. Bubsy 3D. Let's find the positives. In 1995, the creators of the original Bubsy games decided to get together and make a fully 3D platforming game using Bubsy as their main character. Only, around this time, no one else really had done that. Mario 64 was still a year out from being released, and most people didn't know exactly what it took to make a 3D platforming game. But the guys that were making Bubsy, they wanted to be the first. So, they started working on the game for the 32X. But because of how bad the 32X did on the market, they eventually switched platforms to the PlayStation. Now, I have a sneaking suspicion that the reason why this game is so bad is because it was developed for one platform, then moved over to another, but I have no way to prove that. Still though, if you've played this game before, you know as well as I do that this is the worst 3D platforming game ever made. Bubsy 3D follows the infamous Bobcat as he goes around a bunch of very poorly designed 3D levels trying to collect rocket ships and atoms. Now, while you can avoid collecting atoms, you really do need the rocket ships in order to actually beat the game. This is a terrible game, and I know a lot of you are thinking, well, how bad could this game possibly be? I want you to think about Mario 64. You know how you've got that little analog stick where you can run around and it just works? Well, Bubsy doesn't. In every way that Mario 64 is a good game, Bubsy fails. It's hard to hit enemies, it's hard to attack them, it's hard to move around, it's hard to jump, it's hard to do pretty much everything that a platforming game requires you to be able to do easily. The visuals are subpar, considering that there were other games that came out around this time period that looked way better in 3D. I've read that the creators of this game struggled with making a 3D game simply because at the time that they were developing this, there were really no tools for them to use to make a game like this. And it's kind of evident. It just feels like a beta or an alpha of a game that simply wasn't ready to come out. I've personally not seen too many glitches in the game, which is really surprising. The game actually does play. What I have noticed though, is that the game is just not really well designed. I've been told again and again that most people that play this game can only last about 10 minutes. So I played it for a little bit longer than that, and I really didn't have a fun time. But that doesn't mean I didn't find a couple of positives. It was a struggle, but I found some. So let's look at the first one.
Look, a maroon convention!
In every single Bubsy game, Bubsy says a couple of lines that are comedic every so often, usually at the start of levels, sometimes when he dies, and in Bubsy 3D, that doesn't change. In fact, if anything, he speaks a heck of a lot more. Now, while a lot of people would consider that a negative, and believe me, I'm right there with you guys, I have to imagine that there's people out there that enjoy these comedic lines.
I knew I should have taken that left turn at Uranus! Was it something I said? What could possibly go wrong?
Now, I get it. His jokes are so bad. I mean, they're terrible. But hearing the jokes gives you something to look forward to in an otherwise completely devoid game of enjoyment. So there's something there to be said about having the ability to hear him say funny lines, I guess. So really, that's the first positive. He has a bunch of comedic dialogue. What seems like a very common occurrence in the Bubsy games is that Bubsy is a terrible platforming game. Even in the original games, they're just not fun to play because there's just all these weird rules that are just uncommon to people that have come to understand platforming games from Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Mario Bros. Now, one thing that Bubsy does that is kind of better in Bubsy 3D is that it offers a different kind of stage that is a little bit better to play. Now, while the platforming levels are complete and total garbage, I have to say that the swimming levels are kind of better. The swimming stages, unlike the above ground stages, are a lot easier to play because you're kind of floating around, and the controls are more attuned to that. Bubsy feels like he's a submarine, which works, believe it or not, and that makes the game a lot easier to play. I enjoyed playing the underwater stages more than any of the other levels in this entire game, and I'll be totally honest, there is one part of the underwater stages that I don't like, and that's the oxygen tank. It keeps depleting over time, and you have to keep picking up tanks to make Bubsy not drown. And that's fine. You know what? It's a little bit of a challenge, and it adds a little bit more flavor on the gameplay. I never felt like having the oxygen tanks depleting was ever really that dangerous. I was always able to complete the stages and find more oxygen tanks as I went along playing the stage. So, positive number 2 is that the swimming stages are actually pretty cool. I've spoken to a lot of people that like old video games, and there's actually a couple people out there that like to tell me,
"Do you not understand what it was like for kids like us on the Super Nintendo growing up? We didn't have an animal with attitude. All we had was Bubsy, and he was so much better than Sonic. He had comedy, like he was like a Jerry Lewis or a Bill Cosby. How dare you make fun of him? How dare you say his games were bad?"
Yeah, like that. And that's just really weird because I don't agree with them. I don't think the original Bubsy games are really that good, and I don't think people should go back and play them. There are far better platforming games out there. But if you were a fan of the Bubsy franchise and you played Bubsy 3D, you probably were happy because for some reason, it did reference the original games. In Bubsy 3D, there's these little miniature rocket ships that you can ride that are very reminiscent of the ones you could find in Bubsy 2. On top of that, a lot of the enemies in this game are referenced from Bubsy 1. This seems uneventful to most people, but the fact that they actually made references to the original games shows that they were trying to put some care and some time into making a 3D game that was fit for the original fans of the series. And I don't know how many fans are actually out there, but if you are a fan and you haven't played Bubsy 3D, don't. But if you have to, you might smile once or twice from seeing one of these references. So, the third positive for Bubsy 3D is it references the original games. And actually, you could take that as a negative if you really hated those other games. So, do whatever you want there. There are many animations throughout this game that are referencing classic Warner Bros. Cartoons and comedic sensibilities. Just take a look at these end animations that happen after you complete every level. These animations are really fun to look at, and I kind of enjoyed them, believe it or not. In fact, these kind of animations happen all over the game. When you stop playing the game altogether, your character has this weird animation that happens where he kind of plays with your TV, and that's not the only time that that happens. Every time you wait, you'll see a different animation. It shows that there was a little bit of time and effort put into this character and the way that he was thought out and planned. These animations are one of the highlights of playing this game. And in fact, if you're going to play the game for any reason whatsoever, it should just be to see the funny animations that they made. So, the fourth positive is that this game has some really great animations. I know I've started to say this pretty much every week, but this game is one of those really hard ones. It's not fun to play, it's kind of annoying actually, and I didn't enjoy the game for the longest time. Those animations, like I said, really separated the game apart from what could have been easily one of the worst games I've ever played in my entire life. Now, to be completely fair, this game wasn't done without some kind of purpose or drive. These people that were making the game obviously had some idea, just the execution is way off. If Bubsy 3D had come out for the 32X back in 1995, I think we'd be looking at this game as an evolutionary stepping stone to what could have been the future of 3D platforming games. Instead, it came out a month after the North American release of Mario 64, and by that time, we all had seen what good 3D platforming games could possibly be, and Bubsy simply wasn't up to that standard.